You're fine.
Okay, just checking.
So could you imagine being in a society where women don't have rights and that they don't have privileges within the private parts of their home or even in the public sphere of the United States? This is the society that the Israeli women live in today. As a society that promotes women's rights and privileges, we should be aware of equality concerns going on in foreign countries such as Israel. My family is of Jewish descent and Jewish heritage, and they practiced Jewish tradition and Jewish practices, and later converted to Messianic Jews, meaning that they still practice Jewish tradition, but that they recognize Jesus as the Messiah. As they continued with the Jewish tradition, I decided to continue practicing Jewish tradition and privilege, so I have a background on knowing the Jewish rules for certain religious events and affiliation within the public sphere. That being said, private Jewish law could have a negative effect on the public Israeli laws for women. So now that I've given you a surface level knowledge about what's going on within the private sphere of the Jewish community, let's look at the influence of the private sphere on the public sphere. So Jewish law is patriarchal in origin. As such, women's rights within the private sphere are limited. There's an orthodox monopoly that exclude women from public spaces and limit their participation in religious ceremonies. I found this out from a blog on blogs.timesofisrael.com in 2018. Additionally, I found evidence on the UNRSID.org, so it's the UN's articles about the foreign issues going on. And they talked about the essence of a Jewish Israeli woman and what their image within a society looks like. So being very proper, being very traditional, wearing the right clothes, not saying the wrong things, and not necessarily fighting for their own rights. Also, the Equal Rights Law that was passed in 1951 within the private sphere has caused influence within the public sphere because their rights within the private sphere are limited, and once they step out into the public sphere, they're a little more, but they don't have as many rights. So the Supreme Court in Israel said that because of the Halachic rules and the issues with church and state, they don't want to deal with religious practices being tampered with. So they said it's beyond challenge for them to even try to work through this Women's Right Act. And that was found in an article from the Jewish Women's Archive. Now, there's this visual aid that I've created that looks at the population statistics in Israel. As you can tell from this pie chart, the majority of the population is Jewish. There is partially Arab or Muslim citizens within Israel, and then there's like a slight percent of Christian and non-Arabs that make up the population. So as I said, there's a little bit of diversity in Israel, but it's pretty small. And because of that, the majority of the country is made up of the Jewish and the Muslim, but only a small percentage of them are Christian or non-Arab. Thus, there is a lot of tradition and beliefs found in Israel, and because of this, Jewish law specifically has a lot of influence over Israel's public sphere. And as I have said before, the religious makeup is Jewish, Islamic for Muslim, Christian, and other religions. And this was because of the Religious Freedom Act that was passed in 2016, hence why there is presence of Islamic, Christian, and other religions. And so now that we have a better grasp on women's rights in the private sphere, let's discuss how the private sphere has influenced women's rights and privileges from the public sphere. So although there's the separation of church and state in Israel, women's rights within the public sphere are limited but still more abundant than in the private sphere. So the gender segregation is increasing in Israel. There was an article published on reformjudaism.org in 2018 where the person who wrote the article the author, said that it was kind of interesting because of the law that was passed that discussed the separate but equal, and she compared that to how the courts in Israel justify limiting access to women within the public sphere. On that same article, she talked about an experience that a woman named Tal in Israel had with a funeral service. Because of religious reasons, she was not able to stand with her family when burying her brother. No matter how much they pleaded for her to be able to do that, she had to stand alone in a separate section because that was not what met needs and certain things within the grounds of this certain cemetery. Additionally, Israel prioritizes foreign issues over national crises. So, for example, there is a conflict with Arab neighbors, and there has been for a while, with the Palestinians and them fighting over certain holy land. And this was an article published on UNRSID.org, and it just shows that Israel is really trying to protect the state over allowing and protecting certain rights of women, especially because they're not focused on the issues of women's rights or the gender segregation, which thus allows discriminatory and repressive treatment of women within the country. Also, the gender gap and discrimination between females and males has been increasing, and that results in social, economic, or religious, honestly, activities. And so there's like specific jobs, like a woman is a nurse, a man works in the factory, and it doesn't switch. So as I conclude, remember that the public sphere has influenced and affected certain laws and rules for women within the public sphere. And as I stated in the beginning, private Jewish law could have a negative effect on the public Israeli law for women. And to summarize kind of everything that we talked about, really it just is the fact that Jewish law or even other religious traditions within their private homes and private spheres are really influencing everything else that happens to Israeli women, regardless of their religious affiliation, what goes on in the public sphere economically, socially, all of it. And so these women are suffering due to other religious affiliation within the private sphere. So now women in Israel today are more empowered than ever to make a change about it. They're tired of the discriminatory and repressive treatment, and it needs to end because they do not deserve that. They deserve equal rights, regardless of the fact that they are not a man, and regardless of the religious affiliations that they have. Thank you.
It's just a lot.